I mean, honestly, not that we're needy for praise. We are, but it is growing very fast. So I think that was true when we answered our little circular about the podcast. But we also, how many of you listen to Empire, just out of interest?
Oh, people!
Oh, well, in that case, hello and welcome to Not Empire with me, Anita Anand. Can I just say that, if this were some kind of dysfunctional musical act that we run, we've had a trio. Our duo's turned into a trio because wonderful Jane Ohlmeyer, who we first met on the podcast in one of my favourite series that we have ever done, which was Empire and Ireland. So Jane came on as a guest. Willie knew her beforehand. He said to me, you're going to completely fall head over heels in love with her and try and steal her from me. And that happened.
Jane has got more sense than
100% nicked her. I love her more. But then we did this sort of a tour of this conversation.
Like
that
the
we're
three
going to
Ronnies,
have.
that.
The three Ronnies. But we did this in Ireland just last weekend. We have done it in India, and now we are here. And every single time we talk about Ireland and India and the experience of colonialism, something new comes out. So, I mean, I hope you enjoy it. One of the things I thought we'd start with, Jane, and we'd start with you, is that the premise of your book is that...
We haven't mentioned the book, Making Empire, which is the reason Jane is with us, and it's a spectacular...
Well, they just did it over there.
Ah, I was
Yes,
listening.
you were listening. While you were chatting...
I was chatting.
Loudly. I was going, shh, shh. They're talking about us. Shh. Now they're talking about me. Definitely. Shh. But the book that Jane wrote,
which is wonderful.
Wonderful book, actually says that Ireland was the laboratory of empire. That the colonial template was made in Ireland and then exported and rolled out to wherever the British Empire spread its tentacles, but also others took it as what?
Could I ask Jane a question which I wasn't able to answer when it appeared on social media? The Welsh complained that they were before the Irish. What do you say to that, Jane? That the Welsh had suffered the jackboot of the English before the Irish even got kicked off?
May I just say, I love the fact you want to start a fight before she's even opened her mouth. Over to you, Jane. Yeah.
Listen, lovely to be here, everybody. And I wrote a lot of Making Empire in the reading room upstairs. So it's such a thrill to be here to talk about it. I'm not going to say anything about Wales because Ireland was, of course, England's first colony. The relationship with Wales was different.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to park it there,
it's good.
Willie.
It's good enough for me.
Any Welsh people in the audience?
Oh,
no, you've got trouble. Please ask a difficult question after.
Okay.
We can have a conversation afterwards. But what's so interesting to me is Ireland was England's first colony. And if you want, empire was made in Ireland. And then the Irish became active colonists themselves, both the Catholics and Protestants. But empire was also unmade in Ireland. So we're going to go through that spectrum from the making of empire to the unmaking of empire. But I just want to begin by saying, I suppose, three things where Ireland was that, if you want, laboratory, where something was first worked out in Ireland that was later exported around the British English Empire. But I should just add, the Irish were very active in the empires of the other European powers. We didn't have our own empire, but we were trans-imperial. We piggybacked on everybody else's. We'll come back and talk about France in a moment. But when it comes to the English Empire, three things were really, if you want, road-tested in Ireland. Firstly was the ideology of othering. The second was plantation and the ideology of civility that went with it. And the third thing was partition. And I'm going to talk about the first two, but the third one, I'm just going to park here. We'll maybe come back at the end. But the reason partition is so important was the legislation of 1920 that partitioned Ireland into North and South was the exact same legislation that was used to partition India and Pakistan, and then, of course, Israel and Palestine. So, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about partition now. I want to go back and talk a little bit about how if you want, the ideology of othering, we would call it racism today, but they don't have that language in the 17th century, began in Ireland because it began with a 12th century Welshman called Geraldus Cambrensis, Gerald of Wales, who came with the Normans to Ireland, and he portrayed them as savage, uncivil, barbarous. Of course, they were never colonized by the Romans. And that rhetoric of othering really gained steroids after the beginning of the Protestant Reformation in the 1530s, when Ireland became, if you want, a liability for England because of the Catholicism of its people, and it had to be militarily conquered. And you needed an ideology to underpin that. And it was developed by a man called Edmund Spenser. He wasn't the only one, but he was the most important one.
The same Edmund Spenser who we study in English
Fairy
literature.
Queen
The Fairy Queen,
Fairy
Edmund
Queen,
Spenser.
Yeah.
But in Ireland, William, what he did was he wrote a book called A View of the State of Ireland that basically called for what we would say today genocide and ethnic cleansing. He wanted the Irish to be removed and replaced with English Protestants who would bring...
I think transfer is the polite phrase today.
Well, you can say that, certainly. And what was so important about Spenser was, just as Gerald of Wales had been a foundational tract in the earlier period, Spenser's ideology then was used in, if you want, it became the textbook for British imperialists right through the 19th century and became racism as we would understand it today.
I mean, can you give us some examples? Because as you say, most people who've gone to school here will have studied, and it's, I think, interminably boring, but The Fairy Queen by Spenser is inflicted on most undergraduates of English literature. But what was the kind of thing that Spenser was saying about the Irish that made it so easy for actually what we would call blatant human rights violations to go on in Ireland with impunity?
So you have this discourse of othering. So the Irish are subhuman. They're ants, they're grasshoppers, they're literally vermin to be exterminated. It's that
language we still hear being used today about other people's... Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the Spenser playbook, Willie. And alongside that, he's influencing, if you want, the English state and saying you need to now urbanize Ireland and get away from the barter exchange economy, replace it with one that's based on money and commercialization. You need to civilize the Irish. What does that mean? Introduce the English language, English law, English dress and fashions and culture, agricultural and architectural practices. So it's a very powerful discourse of what Macaulay would have called Anglicization. That is all tried and tested in Ireland, and then it's rolled out first to the Atlantic Empire, the Caribbean, North America, and then, of course, into India as well. But Spenser also called for the plantations. So in other words, the expropriation of Irish land. And in this period, something like 8 million acres of Irish land, which is a third of the landmass of the country, was confiscated and then reallocated to Protestant colonists, so you settler colonialism, who came from England, Scotland and Wales, predominantly Protestant, and these were the people who were going to civilize the barbarous, savage, Catholic Irish.
I just think it's worth underlining, because I noticed this, we have such an international audience on empire, but when you say something like plantation in relation to empire, most of us think of cotton and the South. But plantation in this context is something very, very different. It's like we are going to take people who weren't here before, we are going to give them lands that didn't belong to them, and we are going to hope that their roots go down and their branches will spread.
Exactly what's happening in the West Bank today.
But the other thing that I wanted to ask you, and then we're going to sort of move on, because unwittingly what we've done through our own individual works is we've kind of plotted this relationship between Ireland and India in our own books. So, you know, Jane masterfully, and can I just go and say, do yourself a favour and buy her book, has covered, you know, that early part. William, and I'm going to come on to you just in a second, the whole of the East India Company is littered with Irish names and Irish influences. And the stuff that I've done later is perhaps that closing of the circle that Jane talked about. The Irish make empire, but they are also pivotal in unmaking empire. And I write about the kind of links that are forged between Indian freedom fighters, nascent Indian freedom fighters, the Home Rule movement, and also revolutionaries or stroke terrorists who inspire each other, make acts in each other's names, and thank each other for influence and inspiration. So can we move on to the bit where it turns from being sort of a plantation where you suck the earth dry or you spread your branches to, we are going to turn this into an industrial corporation. We're going to use this like a business, and we're going to make money.
So there's a step change in the Elizabethan period when, in an astonishingly modern way, the Elizabethan court privatizes imperialism. And first of all, with the Muscovy Company in 1585, then with the Levant Company in the 1590s, the East India Company gets its charter in 1600, and then the Honourable Society of Ireland gets its charter in
1610, I think it is.
1610. In between 1600 with the East India Company and 1610 for the Irish Society, the Virginia Company is founded, which is settling the east coast of the United States. So in each of these, private individuals get a sort of guarantee and a charter from the Crown to wage war, to colonize, to use, found settlements, to imprison and have the rights to administer justice in parts of the world that are quite other to Great Britain. So in all over India, and the East Indies, all over the east coast of America, but also at this period, in the same way, Derry, which becomes Londonderry. And this commercial organization, all three of them have share prices on the stock exchange. And the whole way through Indian history, it's always one of the great surprises, is that we tend to think of the Raj and we think of British imperialism with the battles like Plassey, with the sort of set-piece balls at Government House, with the braid and the epaulettes and the carriages and all that. But behind all that is the share price on the London Stock Exchange, which is going up and down as battles are won or lost, as shipwrecks take place, as reverses or advances go forward. And the East India Company, like the Honourable Irish Society, like the Virginia Company, has annual general meetings. It has shareholders who either benefit or lose, depending on whether battles are won or lost, or ventures succeed or fail. And it's crucial to see that these are more like multinational corporations like Amazon or Google or Facebook or X or Tesla than they are the 19th century state-run colonialism, of which, in a sense, we're much more familiar from movies and from TV.
There's one amazing thing that I've learned from your work, and I think it may be also true of the early Irish experience. Although it is a corporation, although it is like having this very polished corporate capitalist machine moving in like a combine harvester, sort of churning everything up, the people operating those machines on the ground are often children. Now, the sheer youth of some of the people I know, and you've told me, who go and administer, first of all, the East India Company, and then less so, but almost as much, the Raj, on behalf of the British, were almost the age of my son, 15.
So you
absolutely,
could not...
it's babies going out and running the world.
You could not join the East India Company after your 16th birthday. So the people who are being sent out on these ships are 15 years old. They couldn't buy a drink in a pub. They couldn't get a driving license. And they go out there, and they're trained at the Writers' Building in Calcutta eventually, but in other places before that, in accountancy, a little bit of language skills, law, and then often by the age of 18, they're in the field And you know from their letters they're sometimes completely unable to do the jobs to which they're appointed. So I read the letters of one of my wife's forebears, Alex Fraser, who gets appointed as a judge in Delhi. And he basically doesn't understand Hindustani. And he says, I'm getting about one word in three and how I'm meant to administer justice. So this guy who's barely speaking, so these witnesses are turning up, giving cases, and the judge doesn't understand two-thirds of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's an absurd situation.
Well, they sometimes get a munchie. I've also read accounts of these sort of young kids who are sent off as collectors in India to go and sort of, collect revenue, but also dispense justice and all of these things. They will hire a local munchie, and there are a couple of accounts where they are absolutely certain the munchie is lying to them. That, they just if it comes to a judicial case, he's basically saying his uncle didn't do it, and there's nothing that this poor kid can do about it. And I say poor kid, but I just wanted to also with the Irish experience, is it the same that there are children with that much authority and the heft and the might of England behind them who are dispensing justice and running Ireland at that time?
That is true. So in other words, Ireland is the playground. If you want to learn the business of empire, come and do your apprenticeship in Ireland without a shadow of a doubt. But what's interesting to me are some of these Irishmen who go out as members of the East India Company. And there's one man in particular, a man called Gerald Ainger. How many of you are from Bombay, from Mumbai, or know Mumbai? Well, you may not know that one of the most important founding fathers in the 1670s was a man called Gerald Ainger, who is actually from Dublin. And Irish people don't realise that Ainger Street, which is a very busy street in the centre of Dublin, was built on the back of the money he repatriated from India as a member of the East India Company. So somebody like Ainger would have been one of those accountants, very skilled young boy who came out. But what's important is he colonized and civilized, all in inverted commas, Bombay, the way his grandparents had been planters in Ireland. So we're seeing this crossover, but also the very early city of Bombay was modelled on Derry. We just talked about it. Any fans of Derry Girls? That's the one. Yeah, but it really is the most extraordinary 17th century fortified city, and the same mentality is brought, of course, then to Bombay as well. And so we see all these wonderful crossovers.
And then you get other people crossing often three colonies. So one of the people who I wrote about without initially realizing he was Irish at all is the guy that sounds enormously French, the Comte de Lally. Yeah. And Comte de Lally actually turns out to have been originally called, Thomas Arthur. And he's from Galway.
Or Limerick.
Yeah. He then fights with Bonnie Prince Charlie. He's one of the Jacobite wild geese. He's a Jacobite. He fights at the Battle of Falkirk against the English, then flees after Falkirk, where he ends up fighting for Tipu Sultan and leading Tipu's troops at Srirangapatnam.
Yeah.
So an Irishman fights with the Jacobites in Scotland, ends up fighting against a Dalrymple and a Baird at the Battle of Pollilore. And there's a picture of him.
It's very easy to fight a Dalrymple. It's one of those things. It happens. This kind of it's almost a swashbuckling story of people who go and they're kind of the Where's Wallies of history. They're here, they're there, they're everywhere. Something exciting is happening. But can we just now talk about some of the biggest bastards of history? Because one of them is also, two of them. One I've become obsessed with, and one that I've got an excellent bastard. But your bastard, who is a really terrible, bloodthirsty bastard, is Nicholson. Now, can you give us a little bit of a pen portrait of Nicholson?
I'll do without the quote, which I was trying to find. But
okay.
So General Nicholson is a man who still has two statues outstanding in Ireland.
One in Dungannon at the Royal School, and the other one is in Lisburn city centre, neither of which have any explanation really of who he is.
And he is at the conflict known still in this country as the Indian Mutiny, but which Indians refer to as the First War of Independence, 1857. The largest anti-colonial uprising against any empire in the whole course of the 19th century, anywhere in the world. Nicholson is the man who captures the British imagination by virtue of being an imperial psychopath. And he opens the war, even before the rebellion has started, by famously having the head of a tribal chieftain from the northwest frontier on his desk, when the initial outbreak takes place in Meerut and Delhi, he writes a paper to the government calling for the flaying alive, burning and torturing of all mutineers. And then he founds what's called the movable column, which is this sort of, this is a bunch of psychopaths who pass all the way from the frontier through Lahore to Delhi, massacring people on the way. And there's a famous moment when his troops are sitting waiting for their dinner, and it doesn't come, and it doesn't come. And eventually Nicholson strides in and says, "Forgive me, gentlemen, for keeping you waiting. I've been hanging your cooks." And he has this idea that the cooks have been about to poison them. And they look out, and he points to a tree, and there are all the cooks swinging from ropes. And this man is celebrated throughout the 19th century as the hero of Delhi. In fact, there are biographies as late as 1930 calling the hero of Delhi. And his language is some of the
appalling.
most vilely racist,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
even by the
appalling.
most extreme Victorian standards.
Yeah.
The epithets he used about it. And he's finally shot down in the taking of Delhi in September 1857. And his tomb becomes, in the later 19th century, a place of imperial pilgrimage. People come to Delhi. They don't look at Humayun's tomb. They go to Nicholson's grave. And he is a Ulster.
Yeah, he was born in
person.
Dublin, but he was educated at Pretoria and Enniskillen. But he's just one of many Irishmen. So when you look at the Anglo-Irish, they're the officer corps. So we have Roberts of Kandahar, we have the Wellesley brothers, most importantly, the Duke of Wellington. We've the Lawrence
Roberts of
brothers.
Kandahar, aged 17, is fighting at the Siege of Delhi under Nicholson.
Exactly.
And then goes on to attack
But
Afghanistan.
are these, on the most part, plantation Irish? Are they Ulster Protestants?
They are,
Yeah.
and
Okay,
what's so
I'm gonna
interesting
talk
is they
about mine
bring that experience. They've learnt their business in Ulster. They bring it with them. But it's not just the army. Well, 2/3 of the white soldiers serving in India, either under the East India Company or the Raj, are Irish Catholics. Now they're there because they're for economic necessity. They haven't bought into the ideology to the same extent. But we look at the administration. Well, I'll defer to William there. But just one other point quickly about the Ulster planters, because I think it's by the 1890s, there are 8 provinces in India and Burma, and 7 of the 8 are administered by Irishmen, and Lord Dufferin is the viceroy. Now, Lord Dufferin's family would have come to Ireland in the early decades of the 17th century, and he sees the lens of everything in India through the lens of Ireland. So, I mean, there's some wonderful examples of that.
In Scotland, where I'm from, we all want to be William Wallace on the scaffold shouting freedom, but of course the Scots are as implicated in the administration of empire, and the reason the Scots join the Union, and that this country is known as Great Britain, is the Scots want to join the English and get access to their colonies and get the money. And then in the throughout the 18th century, after 1707, the Scots are always proportionally better represented than the English. They're only, I mean, a much smaller nation than English, but they fill more and more posts, particularly in remote places. You go to Delhi, you go up to the frontier, and it's always Irish or Scots. Well, the English tend to stay in Bombay, Calcutta, and Bombay with their English clubs playing cricket and that kind of stuff. But I would take issue. I don't think you would imply that the Catholic Irish don't buy into the ideology of empire by the 20th century, because you then get, and you've written particularly about Michael O'Dwyer.
Well, I'll even go before that, and I love you, so we're not going to fall out forever about this. But during the potato famine, there are songs that were written by Irish emigres who were having to go to America. So I found this sheet music, which was really very, very big in Pennsylvania. And it was a lament by Irish emigres saying, it's called Poor Paddy Must Emigrate. And it says things like, we've suffered so much, we're starving, we've watched our families die, poor Pat must emigrate. We fought for you against Nana Sahib in the mutiny. We bled for you, but poor Pat must emigrate. So they're saying, you know what, we did all of this for you. There's never any sort of struggle of morality. We did this for you, English horrors, and you're still treating us like this, and we're still starving.
And also in Kipling,
Kipling.
the Barrack Room
Yes.
ballads are all about Irish navvies.
And I must say, you know, actually, so my bastard I present to you is a man called Michael O'Dwyer, who was not an Ulster plantation. He was an Irish Catholic son of Tipperary. He was surrounded by neighbours. He lived with his, I think there were 14 siblings in all. That poor mother of his was so knackered. But, you know, they're surrounded by Irish Catholics. They are decimated in Tipperary by the famine. And yet, he grows up with a father who does not like republicanism and that kind of nascent nationalism that will become Sinn Féin and the IRA, and then what follows. And they stand apart because, you know, O'Dwyer's father says, actually, we've just got to stay true to the king because it's safer. And as a result of that, when he's a little boy, his house is predictably attacked by those around him who find that kind of attitude pretty obnoxious. That, you know, you want us to listen to the man who's done this, to our neighbours and our aunts and our uncles and the people we love. And so, you know, they firebomb his house. He then comes pre-programmed with this attitude that nationalism is chaos. He calls anybody who wants to break away.
And the king and empire
is
of
supreme.
stability.
Empire is to be believed in and fought for. And he exports that very opinion over to India, where
It's a sort of chaos against anarchy.
there's that, but there's also, I mean, it's a really weird thing because although he's very, very proud of being an Irish Catholic, he manages so easily to do what was done to the Irish Catholics, which is denature the humanity of the people he's meant to be in charge of. So when he comes to Punjab, he is the man who is in charge at the time of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. He is, I mean, all of you, nobody needs me to explain. If you don't, hands up if you need an explanation of Jallianwala Bagh. Good, thank goodness. Okay, I mean, you know, if you do and you're too shy, just watch the Attenborough Gandhi. It's Edward Fox blocking that garden and opening fire on innocent men, women and children. And he loses not one night of sleep over this, Michael O'Dwyer, because he thinks it was the right thing to do. It had to be done. The man who was in charge, who ordered the men to open fire on the ground, is a man called Reginald Dyer. He is consumed by doubt.
Also Irish.
Also Irish. Also, can I just say, Michael O'Dwyer's predecessor, Louis Dane, also Irish.
Yeah.
So, you know, this happens. Michael O'Dwyer, the Tipperary Irishman, has no qualms. He also likes hanging people. There is a court case when he just takes his first day in office of 4 people who are accused of exporting bombs. There's a bombing campaign going on amongst the nationalists. One of the kids involved is about 14 years old, is really callowed. The magistrate in charge thinks he's simple-minded, they said, and can't have been too pivotal a part of it. And he's kind of sort of left out, and the others are facing capital punishment. O'Dwyer reverses it and hangs the kid as well, because he wants people to understand that you cross us at your peril. There's no question of morality here. There's no question of compassion or compunction. They are less than us. We need to control them. And so it is, you know, the full circle of this story is that a man called Udham Singh will, in London, not very far from here, not far in you know, Caxton Hall, which is about the same distance from the Palace of Westminster as...
At a lecture like this.
Yes, a lecture like this. Jallianwala Bagh is from the Golden Temple. And he goes to this meeting in 1940 at the height of war. He has sworn vengeance on the men behind Jallianwala Bagh. One has died already. Rex Dyer has died, completely consumed by guilt and doubt and shame about what happened. O'Dwyer, not so much. And so he waits at Caxton Hall. He goes right up to him and he shoots him twice, point blank, through the heart, and that man ends up dying, as so many people did in Jallianwala Bagh, in a pool of his own blood. But the reason I wanted to take you the full circle is because this appeared in a Sinn Féin newspaper. It's called Irish Freedom. I have tried the Gaelic. It didn't go well last time, but I won't do it again. But this is what it says. It says, what must they think when a paper is allowed to circulate freely in Ireland in which Dunn and O'Sullivan are referred to as Irish gunmen, assassins, and murderers, and compared to Chicago gangsterdom. Now, these are prominent Orphean fighters who are fighting for Irish freedom. The same article, writes this newspaper, refers to the Indian hero Udham Singh, who was executed in London in 1940 for the shooting of Michael O'Dwyer, governor of the Punjab at the time of the massacre. We are proud to have the name of this Indian hero linked with those of Dunn and O'Sullivan, even though the intention in linking them was to defame them. And there, you'll see this toing and froing in nationalist literature that, the Fenians are great. The Indian revolutionaries are great. In fact, the Indians try and stage their own the Easter Uprising in 1930. The Guthers ship a whole bunch of weaponry that ultimately doesn't make it to India to have their own Easter
Uprising. The Guthers
uprising.
being a revolutionary agreement named after the uprising of 1857.
Right. Yeah. So, all of these things, all linked, all bound together. Sorry, you wanted to come in and something.
I just wanted to say, Anita's amazing book, this the Patient Assassin. She was on Irish radio talking about it with it was a morning slot, so it was very, and people were absolutely they were shocked,
yeah.
They were horrified, and they're saying, absolutely not. For 100 years, Ireland has completely forgotten and chose to forget this association with empire. Yeah, and I think what we remember and what we forget is very interesting. But that particular incident, I think there was this sense of absolute collective horror when you told that story, Anita.
I mean, honestly, just when I was when the book first came out, I think for the first 8 or 9 months, there wasn't a week where I didn't get letters from Ireland from people saying, that bastard was our bastard, I'm so sorry. And when I went to do a little book tour in Ireland the first time after it came out, there were like people giving me hugs and coming to get their book signed, saying, I'm really sorry. And I was like, you didn't do anything. It's all right, you're okay. But there was such horror, they didn't believe it was possible that, we love the Irish, we do love the Irish, but that they could have done it.
The reason they were giving Anita specifically a hug, and we haven't said this, was because her grandfather was in Jallianwala Bagh that day.
He was a kid. I mean, it's just a complete dumb luck story that he wasn't killed and that I'm here. So he was just a teen who'd come from Kalabagh, from the northwest frontier. He'd come on Vaisakhi Day to do a deal. Very glamorous family, like the Dalrymples, for sewing machine parts. That's how we rolled back in the day. And he'd come to do a little deal on Vaisakhi. He was with his friends. He said to his friend, I've just got to go to Hall Market. I'll be back. Just keep my food warm. He went. He passed a column of soldiers. He was just a kid. He thought this must be what it's always like in the big city. And then they heard the screams because the firing had started and the news swept over the market. And he, being a human being, ran away and hid. And it was only the next morning that he came to the garden and he realized his friends were dead. And he never got over it. He, I would love to say that my hero grandfather took a rock and fought, and he didn't. He was crushed by it. And he went blind very early in his life. And when people said to him, Lalaji, I'm so sorry, you've lost your sight. He said, don't ever feel sorry for me. God gave me my life that day. It's only right he takes something. And so it's a lot of complicated stuff about living with survivors' guilt and the horror and the just generational trauma that this one thing can do, a thing that Winston Churchill called one monstrous act. By the way, not a monstrous act. The days after, there were aeroplanes strafing civilian villages from the sky, which were populated by men who had fought for the British in the war. So, the monstrosity is not isolated to this.
And around the same sort of era, it's not just Jallianwala Bagh with O'Dwyer and Dyer. You get these extraordinary links between Tagore and Yeats.
Yes.
So what happened was Tagore and Yeats actually met in London for the first time in 1912 and became great friends, and they admired, so Tagore admired the way the cultural nationalists had used culture and mysticism and storytelling, and there was this wonderful exchange. And then, of course, Yeats wrote the preface to
Gitanjali.
Gitanjali.
I always
Gitanjali,
mispronounce
yeah,
it.
yeah.
And then Tagore won the Nobel Prize for that before Yeats won his Nobel Prize. So there was a certain amount of, how come that happened? But what's interesting as well, Yeats then was very connected into the Home Rule movement. And there were great friends of Tagore called Margaret Cousins, who was a friend of Yeats as well. And they were then connected to an amazing woman called Annie Besant.
Oh my God, Annie Besant. I love Annie Besant.
Annie Besant's amazing.
Love Annie Besant.
And of course, she led the Indian Home Rule movement. Another woman of Irish provenance. So it's lovely to see the Irish then, if you want, linking up with the home rulers in India. And there's hardly a street in any Indian city that doesn't have an Annie Besant.
Oh no, Annie Besant,
She's so
and with good reason. I mean, she spectacularly fell out with Gandhi towards the end of her life, spectacularly so. Oh God, well she got annoyed with him because he turned up to an event and was rude about the sponsors because they were posh. And so she thought it was unforgivably rude. He then became a much bigger celebrity and star than she was. She couldn't really cope with that because she'd always been the star. And they just sort of set off an awful thing was only resolved towards the end of her life when they wrote beautiful, loving letters to each other after actually years of bitching about each other in a really horrific way. Oh, hi, Catherine. So the other thing I would say about Annie Besant, and the reason you should know about Annie Besant, is that, she didn't just talk the talk. She printed the word. She ran a free press in India, which was always critical of the Raj, and really, sort of raised money for them, stirred it up, pushed the Home Rule agenda as hard as she could, wherever she could. And her position, because the first thing they do during the Roller Acts is they smash up her printing presses. They always go for her printing presses. So Annie Besant, absolute amazing.
But can I also just say with Gandhi as well, he had a very good relationship with somebody called Michael Davitt, who led the whole Land League movement in Ireland and really pioneered passive resistance, the use of boycott and those sorts of tactics. And then, of course, Michael Davitt.
Boycott being
an
an
Irish word.
Tell everyone where we get boycott, because I met Rosie Boycott, who's a journalist here that many people may know. That was my great-grandfather.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yes.
So during after the famine, there was an attempt to clear the land of the pestiferous Irish, these vermin, and Captain Boycott had been the person who tried to clear estates, and then basically they all boycotted Captain Boycott. So that's what happened. Yeah. But it was really
was that one of the roots of nonviolent resistance?
It was. And Gandhi, it's really interesting, but this man, Michael Davitt, was also a great friend of Nauroji's. And he and
Dadabhai Nauroji, the first Indian parliamentarian in this country.
Originally, Nauroji was going to sit for an Irish seat. In the end, it was a London seat. But seeing the way these guys worked together, and particularly the way the cause of Ireland became the cause of India, and the cause of India became the cause of Ireland, and they were completely interconnected, and it was just fabulous to see. And it's not just the men; the women worked very closely together. So Madame Kama, who had been Nauroji's secretary, was very connected to a woman called Maud Gonne, who was Yeats's great muse.
So Madame Kama being a theosophist, and the theosophist being a massive sort of jet propulsion in the Home Rule movement.
Again, going back to Annie Besant. And it was Maud Gonne who crowned Queen Victoria, or labelled her the Famine Queen. I mean, it's lovely to see the way the freedom fighters, both the constitutional ones and then later the Republican ones, were constantly talking to each other. But it does, of course, Gandhi wanted nothing to do with republicanism, but we also see then particularly Bose, De Valera, Michael Collins, Padraig Pearse, these great Irish nationalists. And of course, 1916, in the rebellion of 1916, is the rebellion, you could say, that triggered the unravelling of the British Empire. And if you want, the Irish Republicans were teaching the Indian Republican nationalists their ABC of freedom.
And there's an IRA.
The IRA.
The Indian Republican Army.
Yeah. Also, De Valera, who on his first trip is trying to raise money for Irish Republicans, goes to America, and the first people to meet him at the quayside in San Francisco are a bunch of Sikhs who give him a sword inscribed with his name, a kirpan, saying, "You are inspiring us." So, all of these things are so completely interdependent. We're dependent on time, and I can't see you. Okay, we should take some questions, if there are any questions. Okay, oh God, that was, I mean, I'm not going anywhere else
You definitely
now.
get the award
Sure.
for quickest hand
Oof.
there, sir.
Okay, what's your question?
Avik, this excited gentleman
Let's
here.
get him away.
Hang on,
Just wait
Avik's
till the
coming.
microphone comes. Okay, there we go. Here, Avik, here. This gentleman here with the headphones on his neck. There you go.
Is it working?
Yes.
A question to the panel as a whole. William stressed that it's crucial to see the East India Company as a private company like Apple or Amazon, despite the privately run nature of the company, given that it, as you say, waged war and colonized with the blessing of the crown, and I believe the crown had to bail the company out after the 1770s Bengal famine. How much complicity does the crown have in the actions of the company, at least before 1857? And by that standard, how complicit is, say, the US government in the actions of Amazon?
Oh,
Good
look
question.
at you being all contemporary. Okay, thank you very much.
So, it's very much middle-class London entrepreneurs running the company at the beginning, and it's very much its own thing. And so one of the extraordinary things is that the army, the East India Company army, is completely separate from the British Army. Different recruitment, different personnel, obviously modelled on each other, regarded as a less smart thing to do. If you were posh and could get access to either, you'd always go to the British Army. But if you didn't get into the British Army, there was always the East India Company Army as the lesser option. Partly lesser because it meant being away for the whole of your life at the other end of the world. And with much higher rates of attrition. More people died in the East India Company Army. But what's interesting is the East India Company, rather like that animal in Alien, which sort of starts off as the worm in John Hurt's breast and then becomes the kind of nasty sort of dragonfly and ends up being the mother of all dragons by the end. The East India Company keeps morphing and changing. And after 1770, the famine that you referred to, the East India Company goes bust and has to be bailed out by the British government because it's too big to fail. It's the biggest employer in Britain. And that's in Britain because people are building the sails, the kegs, running the ships. There's a whole support industry in Britain. That's not even counting the guys who are sent off to India. So the government takes a 50% share. And after that, the government takeover of imperial policy. That's how it gets involved. But for the first 150 years, they have nothing at all to do with it. Now, that's in contrast to something like the Royal Africa Company, which is about slavery in Africa, and that is run by the Crown. Literally the royal family and the Duke of York.
And do you know how you know that?
particular.
Do you know how you know the Duke of York? Because the enslaved people would have DOY branded into their chest for Duke of York.
And that's literally the royal family as opposed to the government.
Yeah, it's hideous fact. Let's take a question. This lady
The Stuart
here.
royal family at this point rather than current lot, but anyway.
Thank all three of you very much. Very, very interesting. My question is for Jane. One of the people I've been researching in the context of empire, and also she lived down the road from me in Berkhamsted, is Maria Edgeworth and her father, Richard Lovell Edgeworth. They had a very, very curious position in that they identify themselves in many ways as Irish, and yet they were Protestant ascendancy, and they weren't Irish, and to some extent patronizing, and Maria, even in her 70s, learning Spanish, but never English. I just wonder, could you comment on their position?
Okay.
It's such an extraordinary.
I'd be delighted to. So what does it mean to be Irish? And of course, those English colonists or those who were descendants of the English colonists really wanted to retain their Englishness. The English were having none of that, though, because they'd sort of gone native when they went to Irish, and they very quickly, and this certainly happened with the early settlers, they became Gaelicized very, very quickly. So you end up with lots of people with identity crises, and it depended who you were talking to, and this sort of moving in between different identities. And I'm going to get a shameless plug. I've just been involved in the making of a 4-part documentary called From That Small Island, The Story of the Irish, where we actually document what it means to be Irish from earliest times to the present day. It's being broadcast on RTE, actually. There's an episode tomorrow night. We're hoping it'll come to the BBC in the autumn. But it addresses the complexities of exactly that. But let's not kid ourselves. The English they dismiss people from Ireland. They really, once you've gone to Ireland, you're no longer trusted the way somebody who is born and bred in England is. And actually, that's really upsetting, not just to Irish Protestants, but to many Irish Catholics, especially those who have come as part of the Norman conquest.
And you get the full spectrum of this in the Wellesley family.
Yes.
And the Wellesleys are born in Dublin.
In Dublin, Merrion Hotel.
Merrion Hotel, St. Stephen's Green? No, where is it?
No, it's just near St. Stephen's Green.
St. Stephen's Green, nearby. So that family are born in Ireland. Their estates in Ireland.
Yeah.
They have a country house. They have a townhouse in Dublin. But they want to be English. They're sent to Eton. And they don't particularly like being associated with that.
It's a liability for him.
So when Richard Wellesley, who is a forgotten figure today, but the elder brother of the Duke of Wellington, he is the Governor General, and he conquers more of India than Napoleon conquers of Asia in terms of square miles. He's the crucial figure in the expansion of English rule, East India Company rule over India. And when he comes back, he is given not an English peerage, but an Irish peerage, which he considers to be a major slap in the face, and he calls it this double gilt potato. But his younger brother, Arthur, manages to make the leap, and after Waterloo becomes Prime Minister and is regarded today as the archetypal Englishman of the Wellington boot, of the £5 note, but also, is played by Christopher Plummer without a trace of an Irish accent of any sort in the Waterloo movie.
Absolutely, but I have to also mention Sir Hans Sloane. We're in London. How many of you know where Sir Hans Sloane was born?
Was he born in Sloane Square?
No.
Okay.
He was born in Killalay in County Down.
Okay.
And
The Sloane Rangers are...
The Sloane Rangers are really Irish. And of course, Sloane's collections, which were funded on the back of slave money from Jamaica, were the basis for the British Library, where we are, the British Museum, and the Natural History Museum. And Sloane is of Ireland and celebrated his Irishness. So it's very interesting to look at that.
Yeah. Let's take another question. There was a gentleman there, and let's see if they've got any more. Can someone get a microphone to that woman over there? And we'll take you, sir, I promised you. If you could stand up when you ask, and we can see where you are, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi. My question is for the entire
Into the mic, please, my friend.
Hi, can you hear?
That's better.
So my question is for the entire panel. Anybody can answer. So my family's history is very intertwined with the empire. They fled Meerut in 1857 after the revolt was lost. They fled and went to Lahore. And in 1947...
So as loyalists to the British?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Because Lahore was under East India Company rule.
So they had to flee somewhere to save their lives. So they fled to Lahore in 1857, and then when India was partitioned, they came back from Lahore to Delhi. My question is more around, why do you think the empire ended?
Ended?
My question is if most British documentaries would talk about, at the end of the war, colonies were a burden and they were given away. And there is another version where Lord Wavell, as late as 1943, is writing that we would hold on to the empire for the next 30 years.
Sure.
And and the other version, obviously the independent movements across the empire, the American influence, because America's view of the world post-World War did not include Britain and France holding on to their colonies. More questions?
Can I just say, you're going to be so disappointed, but all of those things can be true. Yeah. This is a perfect storm of events. So it is absolutely true that the British Empire was, groaning with the expense of the war. Absolutely
bankrupt.
True. Bankrupt. It didn't have money to send out that many people to look after that much space. It was getting harder because the independence movement was gaining traction, because Gandhi could turn everything off like that and stuff would shut down. You do that and suddenly you realize your strength in numbers, and the Brits see that they are so outnumbered, and now the Indians know it. That is terrifying. There's just one very interesting thing, Mary Beard, who was on our podcast about the Romans, and she said, I said, look, did they ever put the slaves in uniform? And she said, no, never. They deliberately didn't, because they didn't want the slaves to know how many there were. And that's what happened in India. So that recognition is absolutely true. You're absolutely right about America dissuading Britain or disapproving of Britain having imperial interests anymore. Roosevelt positively hated it. He raised it during the Yalta Conference. It really annoyed Churchill. So all of those things, all that mood music was going on. Shashi Tharoor said, or who was it in the last session where Shashi was? He said, empires aren't destroyed, they destroy themselves in a way. Bruno said that. And that is true, but there is a whole confluence of issues that happened, every which one that you've mentioned, and they were all needed for something as vast and large.
Plus the Labour Party victory.
And and they wanted bread.
If Churchill had won that election, you might have seen
he would have tried, but there's still no money. He would have tried, but it wasn't a popular thing to do when there's money to be spent on a nascent NHS and the things houses and the things people needed here. Good. Right. Did I have let's have a woman ask a question. Yay. Go on.
Finally, hello. Antithetical to the previous gentleman's question, I wanted to know your thoughts on why it began and a small island like...
The weather.
Yes. So apart from what...
explain Ireland.
Apart from what Gerard Diamond writes about in Guns, Germs and Steels, I'd really like to know your thoughts on why a small island like Great Britain...
Come on, you start this.
One more.
Okay.
And if you could go back in time, all of you, to go on a different trajectory, what would you choose?
As a job?
To prevent today's chaos.
Right. Oh, God.
If there was something like that you could dream about, what would you do?
All right.
So why did it begin? I mean, specifically because both England and Scotland, because they were separate at this point, were very poor compared to their neighbours, and they were looking over their shoulders at Spain and Portugal, into which the gold of the New World and the silver of the New World was flooding in. The Dutch were stealing a march on them. They'd only just become a nation, and yet specifically what happens is that the Dutch go off to the East Indies, now Indonesia, to the island of Run, bring back 3 shiploads of pepper, which they sell at something like 10,000% profit. And there's this massive boom. And then the Dutch come to England and try and buy English shipping in London at Deptford. And
you're going to have to do the short version.
And the English just... They say, we're not going to sell it to the Dutch, we're going to do our own version. It's the idea of the Dutch coming and buying their ships that kicks off the East India Company.
So I'm going to give you a very brief answer, and I think one is security. In other words, Ireland was a backdoor into England, especially after the onset of the Protestant Reformation. But the other answer is a very simple one, it's greed. And what Ireland does for the English Empire is it gives them access to land, and that land then helps to fuel actually English imperialism, because it's my colleagues working on this. It helps them borrow money, and there's an oligarchy here in London that is using their Irish land to fund English imperialism. The other thing Ireland does is it provisions the empire, especially in the Caribbean, and the whole economy in Ireland is made to be a subservient one. And then the third thing is actually cannon fodder, human capital. So this is where Ireland is so important, whether it was predominantly for the army. So it all boils down, sadly, to human greed.
Yeah, I mean, but I'll do something that you'll be surprised about, because I do Empire. But I mean, there are, it's an island nation, so there is, supremacy of the waves. Rule Britannia, there was the waves. Britain is pretty advanced when it comes to their ships and their know-how. They're good at map making. They're also, there's a land of curious, inquisitive people with good education of a certain class. So there is this sort of desire to search out the world, which then, you come back with a map. let's say we're doing Canada at the moment. You come back with a map of the coastline of Canada, there is always someone who's going to say, great, let's set up a corporation and, sort of start
There's
doing
beavers
something.
and fish.
Beavers and fish and walrus tusks. So, I think that is also part of it. As far as going back in a fork in the road, I don't have anything very profound to say, but I wouldn't mind. I never knew my granddad because there's a massive age gap between my father and his next sibling, and so he was long, long dead before I was born. But I would love to go and hug that 17-year-old kid and just go, it's not your fault, it's all right, it's okay. And, because you hid, look at my kids, they're here. I would say that. That's the only answer I have for that.
I don't have one.
Yeah. Shall we have a final young person's question? Have we got time for one? Final young person question. There we go, let's go over here. Just here, there we are, great.
Parallel to the links between the nationalists in Ireland and the nationalists in India, have you found any links between the unionists in Northern Ireland and the sort of proponents of the two-nation theory in the subcontinent?
Bloody hell. That's a good question.
Really?
Okay. While I'm just stunned, do you want to take it? Do you want to take it?
know the answer.
Okay.
Do you know, that's a really good
Yeah.
question, and I'm sure there were, but that is not something, when I'm thinking about people who have worked on this, that they've actually studied. So
That's your
one day,
PhD.
yeah, your
Yeah.
PhD, that's what I'm about to say. Come and see me in Trinity College Dublin. I'd love to
Yeah.
talk to you, because there's a cracking PhD there, because it's inevitable
Good-
that
it's
there
a very
were
good
those
question.
conversations.
Can I also say, bloody hell, Dad, good work.
Yeah.
Jeez. Listen, just before you go, we're going to do the thing that we always do, which is a selfie with our lovely audience. Stay where you are. Okay, right. Everybody look pretty. Here we go. Are you all in? Everyone wave, hands in the air. There we go. Empire, we'll put it on our feed. Can I just say what a delight you've all been. Thank you so very much. All intelligent, wonderful, brilliant questions. You make us think. Thank you. Thank you very much.